Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be back in the book of Psalms, and we are going to be kind of finishing up what we've been doing recently is looking at figures of speeches in the book of Psalms. We're going to finish that up today. We're not going to have exhausted all the different types of figures of speeches that are present in the book of Psalms. We just have looked at a few. You can go back and watch the past videos as well. But today we're going to be finishing up that journey, if you will, looking at figures of speech. Before we do, my name is Nathan House, and I am with the Houston Church of Christ in Houston, California. You can follow us also on our Facebook page, just Houston Church of Christ Facebook. Love to have you join us on there as well for our normal worship as well. But let's go ahead and get into this a little bit. So we're going to look at two final types of figures of speeches that we see in the book of Psalms. Both of these, synecdoche and metonymy, are both a figure of speech that use a form of substitution. And so it's one thing substituting for something else. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more and we'll look at these substitutions. But one of the key things as we go through the book of Psalms is that we need to be aware that a lot of the book of Psalms is using Hebrew poetry. It lends itself to a lot of figures and images. And so if we want to become better students of the book of Psalms and really of scriptures in general, book of Proverbs as well, and many other, we need to understand it. The Bible is jam-packed with these images. Maybe you don't need to know that it's a metonymy or whatever, but you need to understand that these are figures and when they're literal and when they're not, and it'll help you in your studies. So again, learn to recognize some of these. Learn to ask what are they doing? What is the meaning of this? So as we go through today, we're going to look at the last two that we're going to look at. We're going to begin with synecdoche. And this one, literally, is just a part for the whole, or sometimes it's the vice versa, a whole for the part. It's also known as representation. This is when something small represents the whole, or again, vice versa. A part of something represents the whole of something. And so one example, and I borrowed this from Duvall and Hayes, and again, I referenced their work at the beginning of this, but Duvall and Hayes uses this example. We talk about we talk about Washington, D.C., and sometimes that phrase, that expression represents the whole of the United States. So one might be watching the news and they're talking about Washington, D.C., they're talking about this, and it says Washington and Tokyo better work out their differences. Well, we're not just talking about those two cities. Those two cities are a part that represent a bigger picture, a part that represents a whole. So again, we see these as representations, as substitutions, right? Washington is a representation of the United States. Washington is a representation or a substitution of something else. It is a part representing or being substitute for the whole. So this is, again, what this means. Synecdoche, a part for the whole. So again, be able to identify these things, and they are very common in the book of Psalms. So you're reading the book of Psalms. I'll show you a couple of them real quickly. Identify the part. So we're going to see the part, but what does the part represent? So I'm going to put it on the screen here. We're going to go through all of those texts. So let's go to Psalm 44:6. Let's back up a little bit. Verse 4, "You are my king, O God, ordain salvation for Jacob." So again, we see this is a royal psalm, or, so here's God represented as king. Through you we push down our foes. Through your name we tread down those who rise up against us. For not in my bow do I trust, nor can my sword save me. So here we have a part representing the whole. What is the part? Well, the bow is the part. The sword is the part. It represents all those military devices which we might trust in. And so, we're not going to look at this and say, well, I don't trust in my bow or my sword. I trust in my spear, though. Well, no, because these represent the whole. Anything that we might use in a military battle, the sword, the bow represent those things. So again, it is a part representing the whole. Let's look at another one. Psalm chapter 20, verse 7. Kind of the same thing. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. So again, what is the part? The horses and the chariots. The horses and the chariots represent all man's military might, right? All of those things which might represent human strength, military might, some people put their trust in those things. So the chariots and the horse are representing something much larger than just a chariot or a horse. They're representing military power, military strength, or might. And the psalmist says, we don't trust in those things. We trust in the Lord. Let's look at another one. Look at Psalm 44, verse 18. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. So where's the synecdoche? Where is the part? Where is the substitution, the representation here? Well, we have actually two. Our heart, what is heart representing? What is it substituted for? Really, it's being substituted for the whole of that person. Our heart, everything about me does not turn back, nor have our steps. Well, our steps are representing something else. They represent our walk, our way of life. So again, we have our heart. It's a part representing the whole. Our steps, it is a part representing the whole. The whole what? All of our walk, all of our life. So it is a part for the whole. Let's look at a few more real quickly. We won't do too many, just for the sake of time. Here's one. Be gracious, Psalm 6, verse 2. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are troubled. Well, what is the part? Well, here we see bones. Bones are a part representing what? Bones are a part representing the whole of this person's body, the anguish that their body feels. And it's interesting, one writer was pointing out that when bones are frequently used in the psalmist as a representation or a substitution, as it's frequently used, bones are frequently used in difficult times, right? My bones are troubled. And so we'll see this several times in the book of Psalms as the bones representing the whole of man going through difficult times, going through struggles. For my life is spent with sorrow and my years with sighing. My strength fails me because of my iniquity and my bones waste away. Again, the bones are the part representing the whole. And again, as the writer points out, again, kind of interesting, the bones are used, this image is used frequently in the book of Psalms when the psalmist is going through hardships, when their strength is failing, when they're going through these difficulties. So again, it's kind of interesting to note that. Let's go back here, and we didn't look at all of these on the screen. We looked at most of them. Let's look at, again, metonymy. So when we began, we began with this. The synecdoche and the metonymy are both figures of speech used using a form of substitution. So metonymy is also going to be a form of substitution. It's a little different, though. Metonymy comes from the Greek and then through the Latin, but the word meant a change of names. So it means to change the name of something. So again, kind of interesting. It's also known as effects and causes. So you might read one person talking about this figure of speech and call it effects and causes. Might be called metonymy. We're going to call it metonymy. But again, you can see why it might be called effects and causes. So the effect is what is clearly seen, but the cause is what is really the important thing behind it. So the writer will talk about the effect. However, whatever is happening is affecting the psalmist. However, it is impacting them. So like if I'm, again, I borrowed this illustration from Duvall and Hayes, although I improved their illustration because they talked about baseball. And let me just tell you, baseball's boring. So let's talk about a real sport. Let's talk about football, and let's talk about a real team, the Raiders. So now having dealt with those small things, let's talk about this. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching the Raiders game, and the Raiders are on the 1 yard line. And they're about to score. And I say, come on, Raiders, make me happy. So the effect is I want the Raiders to make me happy. But what is it that I really want? What is going to cause me to get happy? Right? What is the cause? So it is, again, this is called effects and cause, or metonymy. Come on, Raiders, make me happy. The effect is I want the Raiders to make me happy. And I'm using this instead of saying, come on, Raiders, score a touchdown. Well, obviously what I want, the cause, I want a touchdown. But what I'm focusing on as I'm speaking in this figurative way, right? I'm skipping the cause and I'm going right to the effect. Make me happy, Raiders. Score the touchdown. Defeat those Kansas City Chiefs and Denver Broncos and Dallas Cowboys and all those other horrible, wicked teams. So what is a metonymy? It's a change of name. It's the effects and cause. And again, this is something we see in Scripture. We're only going to look at one example of this, but let's look at Psalm 51. This is a text that most of us are familiar with to some degree. David here is lamenting his sin. He's lamenting the place that his sin has placed him. Um, if you go back to the Psalm 51, it says, a Psalm of David when Nathan the prophet went to David after he had gone into Bathsheba. So this is talking about David's sin with Bathsheba, the resulting murder of Uriah. Anyways, it says, so let's go ahead and begin at the top. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. So what is it David wants? And again, all of these things are going to be clues, right? Helping us understand what David wants. What does it David want? Well, this is pretty clear what he wants, right? Blot out my transgression. Wash me, cleanse me. What is it he wants? He wants God to deal with his sins. And then he still talks about, look at this idea of sin real quick. Transgression a couple of times there, sin. And again, this goes throughout the whole thing. Sins, the word sin keeps popping up here. Iniquity. So again, as you look at these words, iniquity, sin, transgression, David has come to the realization of his sin and his iniquity, and he is torn up about it. He says in verse 3, I know my transgression. My sin is always before me. I'm constantly dwelling on it and thinking about it. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Now skip down to verse 7. What is it that David wants? Purge me. This goes back to what we saw up here in verse 1 and 2. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me, cleanse me. What is it David wants? Purge me with hyssop and I shall be clean. So David is wanting God to cleanse him, isn't he? Wash me. Here's that same word. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. So David is wanting God to cleanse him, to wash him, to make him whole again, if you will. So look at verse 8. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Well, first of all, we're not doing Synecdoche again. We're doing metonymy. But here is again another Synecdoche, right? A part representing the whole. Again, it's bones. So these bones represent his life being broken apart. But let's focus on the metonymy. Where is the change of name? Where is the cause and the effect? Well, first of all, what is the effect? David says, this is what David says. This is David's crying out right at the Raiders game. This is David's cry. Let me hear joy and gladness. That's the effect that David is focusing on. So what is David really wanting? What is the cause? How is it that David is going to have joy and gladness? When God washes him, when God cleanses him, when God purges him. So verse 8, we see this metonymy, this change of name, this cause and effect. This is the effect, right? Let me hear joy and gladness. What's going to cause this to happen? When God washes him, when God cleanses him. So again, what a great psalm that is. And we're not going to go any further today. But again, let me just put this last little screen on real quickly for you. When you're reading the book of Psalms, beware of the figures of speech used in the Psalms. Again, I'm not telling you have to memorize their names and know what they're called, Synecdoche, whatever, but just be able to recognize that these things are figures, they're images, they represent something. So begin to identify them. Again, not necessarily, I'm not trying to tell you have to know their names, but learn to identify them. Ask questions of them. What is this representing? What is this substituting for? What is this, so again, there's all sorts of figures that we haven't looked at, but ask questions of these figures of speeches. These things will help you to take your study of the book of Psalms to another level as you'll start to see things you haven't seen, and your understanding of these Psalms will, I think, improve and hopefully ultimately will help you to become a better student and a better Christian and a better disciple of God. Anyways, I hope this study was interesting and I hope it was a benefit to you. And let's all remember the great forgiveness that we do have in God, a great God, a loving God, full of mercy. You guys have a great day. God bless.